Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we're going to take a look at a feature we haven't seen before. That is the brake fans in the A320. How do we use them, what do they do, and when are we going to use them? This would be applicable to any Airbus simulator that you're using that has the brake fans simulated. Today we're going to use the A32NX mod for Microsoft Flight Simulator, as that has them recently added into the simulator. We're going to be flying and approaching to Aberdeen here where we are, which is a short runway, and we're going to see how that brake fan usage will impact our turnaround and what we would do with them. I am a real-world Airbus pilot, but none of this is for any real-world use. It's just for our use in home simulators to hopefully give you some extra context. As we descend down into Aberdeen, let's look at what we're talking about. The brake fans switch is simply this little button here with brake fan. It's not fitted to all Airbuses, it is an option. So yeah, you may find airlines that don't have it installed at all if they don't think it's useful for what they're doing. What it does is there are individual fans on each of the wheels, although you can't see them operating or anything like that from the flight deck. You just get that little on light will come on when we turn them on. So the brake fans are installed on each of the wheels obviously, and they spin, which blows cold air or just ambient air onto the brake discs. This is useful because the brakes can get very hot after a landing, particularly on a short runway, and as a result we may need to cool them down before we can take off again. They become particularly useful on short runways, such as where we're going, Aberdeen. So I'm talking runways sort of around 2,000 meters or below, particularly if you're heavy. Also, obviously hot destinations. So if you're flying to places with, even with long runways, but if it's very hot, 40 degrees Celsius or even 30 degrees Celsius, and you're arriving heavy, you can find that brake fans will be very useful there. They also come in useful when there's a long taxi, because the Airbus on the ground will naturally sort of accelerate on us where we need to use the brakes, even though we're not adding thrust. That on two engines it will do that, so they become very hot during long taxis just because of the constant use. The Airbus uses carbon brakes. As a result, when we land they will heat up and they become more usable the hotter they are initially anyway. When they're really cold they don't actually grip very well, but when they're already warmed up they can be much more grippy straight away. They can be sort of quite biting actually. You have to be quite careful not to engage them too much. So having them warm isn't necessarily a problem in terms of temperature for stopping power, because they tend to grip a bit more immediately when they are warmed up. The downside of that is when they are cold, obviously they don't grip so well straight away. Also, they wear faster when they're cold usually. So let's get ourselves onto this ILS here and we'll land and I'll carry on. Aberdeen today is a short runway. It's also dry, so I'm going to have to use medium auto brakes to make sure we stop in time. The downside of medium auto brakes is it will put most of the brake or the stopping energy into those brakes, which are currently nice and cool at 20 degrees. That's pretty cool actually. That's not, you wouldn't normally arrive after a flight with that unless you had a really long flight, because they're probably warmed up from your taxi out. But there we go. So we're landing with 20 degree Celsius brakes. So even if I use max reverse, which I will, but on a dry runway, it's not going to make much difference, because by the time your engines have spooled up, the medium auto brake would have slowed us down enough. And on a wet or slippery runway, you can use max reverse. Another way to, and you'll find, sorry, on a slippery runway, if you use max reverse, you'll find that it takes more of the strain than the brakes. It's particularly useful on contaminated wet runways. Something else to remember is if you're trying to keep your brake temperatures cool because you don't have brake fans, what you can do is you can use low auto brake and then maximum reverse. That way the brakes won't engage as much and the reverse will take a lot more of the strain. So when you're landing on a long runway, that could be an option for you. Something else you can see is we are landing with a tailwind, 4 knots from the right, but a little bit of a tailwind. That's another reason, of course, that your brakes might warm up more than normal. Now you might see some traffic out there. That's just because I have the AI traffic on to try and keep the frame rates low, so do ignore that traffic. If the frame rates go too high, we find that the video recording software can't handle it. Right, there we go then. There's touchdown, max reverse.
20, 10, 5. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20, 10, 5. 20,
As you vacate the runway and on your taxi in, you may get the ECAM warning brakes hot, which you can see has now appeared for us. It says brakes hot, delay takeoff for cool. I think after landing actually it can give a different one, but this could be the way I've done the recording. There's another ECAM message after landing which you may get, which will tell you to, if possible, apply chocks and release the parking brakes and use the brake fans. So for aircraft equipped with brake fans, it will tell you to do that. This one is more for a departure, but that could be because of the way I've done the replay and recorded the flight. So you may get either of those ECAM messages, but they're pretty self-explanatory. They'll come on when the brakes go over 300 degrees Celsius. As you can see, we are now at 375 degrees Celsius. Because of the way I filmed this video, that's not quite how it happened. What you get is you land and the brake temperatures will continue to rise for a few minutes after landing. They'll keep going up. It takes time for that heat energy to sort of really appear in the brake discs. If you have a long taxi in, it's only going to get worse as you continue to add brake energy into those brakes. So for us now, we're passing through 380 degrees. What you don't want to do is, as soon as you've landed, turn the brake fans on. It's really not ideal. The only reason to do that is if you think the brakes are going to get incredibly hot. So if you think they're going to go above maybe 500 degrees Celsius, or maybe even a little bit higher, but if they're going to get really hot, then you might turn the brake fans on just to prevent that happening, just to get as much cool air in as possible. The reason we don't do that normally as routine is because the brakes, they take time to heat up evenly and fully. So what's happening at the moment is there could be certain parts of the brake discs that have hot spots, and these could oxidize if you were to just pour cold air onto them straight away. So it's better to let the brakes sort of warm up, and then you can cool them down using the brake fans as and when you get that option. So that's what we're going to do today. Let me get these lights off, as I should have done already, and get the APU up and running. So let's say we have a short turnaround now. We're only going to be parked up on stand for the minimum time, sort of 25-30 minutes, something like that. How are we going to deal with that when the brakes are showing up so hot? So as I said, leave it for 5 minutes if you can, or until later on in the taxi in, unless they're going to get really hot over sort of 500 degrees. But assuming they aren't, then you can just wait a little bit. By the time you're reaching the stand, you want to have turned them on before you turn onto stand. And this is the next important thing. Let's say it hasn't been 5 minutes, but I'm about to park and I know I need those brake fans today. So let's park. Let's take this stand here on the left. So what am I going to do about that? Well, I'm going to have to turn them on before we arrive on stand. So you can see the brake fan light says hot. It does flash up. Oh, let's bring it to a stop here. So I'm just going to stop here before we turn onto stand. Let's turn off the last taxi lights. So before we go on to stand, I'm going to turn the brake fan on now. So there it goes, brake fan on, and we get the warning or the ECAM memo here telling us it's on. So let's go and park up. The reason we do it here and not when we are on the stand is because the first moment you turn on the brake fan, it will pour out a whole load of carbon dust. As I said, they're carbon brakes. So if there's ground crew waiting, which there usually would be, you don't want to just blast carbon dust all around the apron. It's not great for people to breathe in or anything like that. It only lasts for a couple of seconds the first time you turn the fans on after the brakes have been this hot. So now they're running, that's fine, and we can turn on to stand. There's no more brake dust being blown about. That happens just as we turn them on. So that's why we'll do that there. So we're going to park up on stand. And as I said, we can just leave those fans running now. So let's do that. Let's set the parking brake. APU is available. We can shut down those engines. Oh, maybe not yet. Maybe do that one on. Turn the seatbelt signs off now. Wait till those engines are spooled down a bit. There we go. Now we can turn the beacon off. And here we are. We get that master caution. Here you go. Brakes hot. Park brake. Prefer chocks. Delay takeoff for cool. So what it's saying here is, and I think if that was off, oh well, yeah, the real aircraft would have a line telling you to turn the brake fans on. But yeah, this is saying park brake prefer chocks. So what you would do is get the chocks in place outside, which put in around the wheels just to prevent the aircraft from rolling. And then once those are in, you can release the parking brake. That obviously leaves a gap between the brake discs and the actual brake pads, so it will allow for better airflow. So yeah, but in this case, we don't have chocks, so we're going to leave that park brake on and leave the fans running, and they'll gently cool down. So there we go. So just to recap, don't turn them on straight away after landing. Give it a couple of minutes. If it's going to go above 500 degrees, turn them on straight away anyway. That's if they're looking really hot, but that's quite unusual. That would have to mean you did excessive braking in a hot place with a tailwind and a heavy aircraft. It's possible, but yeah, hopefully not. Don't turn them on once you're on stand. Make sure you turn them on before you get onto stand. And you may get this ECAM warning telling you about it. Brake fans are noisy. You can hear them here whirring away. They've got a really high-pitched noise, modelled nicely by the fly-by-wire team. So they sit in here. There's these little metal discs or metal fan blades in there that you can see whizzing around, and they make that noise, and you can feel the airflow. If you're doing your walk around, they're quite a nuisance because they are really high-pitched, whiny, sort of noisy things. But they're manageable. You should really have ear protection these days doing a walk around on an Airbus because of the APU noise and the brake fan noise and so on. But yeah, just those, one in each of these main gears down here. And this sound effect is exactly right. That's exactly how they sound. They're just very loud. They overpower the sound of the fuel pumps and everything like that, most definitely. Okay, so get back on boards. Okay, let's imagine we're now taxiing out for our departure after our short turnaround. We've got the brake fans still on, and if we look down, we can see that the brakes are getting under control now. They're down at 230 degrees, so that should be okay to take off, you'd think. They're in the green, that's fine. Below 290, they should go green again. Well, the actual problem here is because the brake fan switch is on, we can't take off until this says 150 degrees Celsius. The reason is the brake fans instantly give a cooling effect on the temperature sensor. So for this one, we're going to have to wait until they're down at 150. Now you could turn off the fans. If you weren't using the brake fans, the limit is 300 degrees. But remember, it takes time for them to warm up. So what you don't want to do is taxi out to the holding point with the brake fans on. You get there and you see this number and you go, oh, well, that's no good. So you turn it off and you say, okay, it's below 300, that's fine. Because that's not acceptable. The reason is these brakes will be too hot for takeoff, because they will start to go up again now the brake fans are off. They go 230 and they could go to over 300 eventually, and they may do that whilst you're taking off, which will give you an ECAM caution. It's quite distracting, so not ideal. So brake fans on and tough, we have to let it go below 150 degrees Celsius because we've been using the brake fans. Now if we'd had the brake fans off for 10 minutes, and they were still down, and then they were down at 230, we could take off. If the brake fans weren't fitted, or we hadn't used them, or we weren't using them for a period of time before takeoff, then 300 degrees is the new limit. The reason 300 degrees is a limit is not because of brake energy or being able to use the brakes on takeoff. What it's for is when the gear comes up, obviously it goes into the wheel well, and it's stored underneath the cabin. In there's hydraulic lines, obviously, because there's lots of hydraulics used in the aircraft. So if we have a hydraulic leak and it goes onto really hot brakes, that can actually cause problems. It could ignite or catch fire, something like that. So that's why we have a brake temperature limit, which we must follow, because we need to make sure that if the hydraulics do leak, the brake temperature does not cause an issue. So below 300 degrees, or like I say, with the brake fans on, below 150 degrees displayed for us down there. Hopefully that makes sense for you. We can't use the brake fans on takeoff. So once we go to take off, we have to turn them off. The reason is foreign object damage. So there's a chance, stones, things like that could be thrown up by maybe the nose wheel or something like that could get ingested by them or put on, I don't know, damage them if it's for some reason. But yeah, so brake fans, we turn them off when we line up on the runway. It's not the absolute end of the world. I think there is a micro switch that would stop them anyway. I'm not sure. But anyway, the procedure is turn them off as you line up on the runway at the latest to make sure that they're off for takeoff. The final thing you might see then is you could get a message, you could get an ECAM warning during takeoff or shortly after takeoff about the brakes being hot. Now this could be because you have something called the brake disc is binding, where it's actually running, it's rubbing slightly against the brake pads during the takeoff roll, something like that, which may cause it to heat up during the takeoff. But what the ECAM will do is it will warn you that they've gone above 300, and it will suggest lowering the landing gear if the speed limits are okay and things like that. But that's very rare. That's more of a failure situation. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been of interest to you. Just a few little extra details there about the brake fans. As ever, there will be more live streams and tutorials coming on the channel soon, so do please subscribe if you'd like to see more of this content. Otherwise, we'll see you again in another live stream or video soon. Thank you. Bye bye.